Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us for today's special online edition of Balkan Breakfast. This morning we are not meeting in person at the German Council on Foreign Relations, nice premises at the Berlin Tiergarten area, over real breakfast and coffee as we do regularly on a monthly basis, but virtually to be able to engage many more of you online on an important and timely topic, and we will also by default save on breakfast. My name is Milan. I am a senior fellow at the DGAP, German Council on Foreign Relations, and it's my pleasure and honor to be your moderator. After much anticipated European Parliament elections, it is time to discuss how its outcome, including on national level in some countries, in some member states, might impact on various EU policies. We will focus on the EU enlargement with a special attention to the more advanced Balkan countries, which for the outgoing Commission was defined as, quote unquote, the geopolitical necessity for Europe. As the next European Parliament will tilt further to the right, with populist and far-right parties strengthening their relative position, the title of our discussion is Staying the Course on EU Enlargement. I realize that it is somehow a fizzy topic. Enlargement was not explicitly part of the election campaign. Also, the enlargement file remains mainly in the hands of the Council and the Commission. And yet, the next European Parliament and top jobs discussed yesterday at the informal European Council will play absolutely crucial role in how this process will move forward in the upcoming political cycle. So in the European elections, there were mixed results. Centrist super coalition of conservatives, socialists, and liberals retained its majority in this next European Parliament, despite high-profile gains by far-right and populist parties in France, Germany, and elsewhere. However, the supermajority will be more fragile and fluid, and in some member states, especially in France, it triggered snap elections and political crisis after President Macron, in a shock move, dissolved the Assemblée Nationale. We will hear more about it when we start. Of course, we will touch upon some recent good news as well, such as member states agreeing a negotiating framework for the accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova, the Commission's positive report on Montenegro's progress, which could unblock its membership talks with closing some more chapters by the end of the year, etc. At the same time, we will discuss regional tensions triggered by Serbia especially, and what we can do to prevent more destabilization. Our distinguished speakers today are Manuel Sarrazin, a special representative of the German federal government for the countries of the Western Balkans, and a former long-time member of German Bundestag for the Green Party. Good morning, Manuel. Then Maillard Kocijančič, foreign policy advisor at the cabinet of the President of the European Council, a former spokesperson of the European Commission, and a Slovenian journalist. Good morning to Brussels. And Sébastien Maillard, special advisor to the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris, where he previously served as its director after a career on journalism. Good morning, Sébastien.
Morgen.
After some 25-30 minutes, I will open up discussion for Q&A part. It's good to see many friends, familiar faces, and experts on this topic in the audience. And we are set to go until 10:30, but this is informal breakfast, as we always do it at the Rauchstrasse. If we cover all the important topics, we can also finish sooner. Before we start, I would like to thank my colleague Frauke Zibas for supporting this Balkan Breakfast series, and also the Balkan Hub network, of which Sebastian's organization is part, and also our communication and events team. Let me remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded. It will be later available on our YouTube channel. And it's still under the Chatham House rule, meaning that you can use what you hear, but not attribute it to one of the speakers. Without further ado, let's start with you, Sebastian. So, what a double earthquake in France in these European Parliament elections. The national rally of Marine Le Pen scored the highest ever result in the national elections, 31%. President's party got about a half, and President Macron then decided to go for a rapid snap elections in 12 days, the first round. To what extent the political course of France, which shifted from being more skeptical member state on enlargement towards almost a driving force behind geopolitical enlargement, to what extent this political course is on the ballot in this election?
Thank you, Milan. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. That actually you had the forward even before there was this political mayhem in France. Before I get to your question that I will, of course, address, I'd like just to run through quickly the European elections you were describing, because it's true that we see probably an institutional and political stability in the EU, but in a changing environment. We had the same turnout and seemed the same political majority, even in the same order, with the leading EPP and then followed by the Social Democrats and Renew, and probably, even though it wasn't fully dealt last night, the same president of the Commission. So there's stability needed in a changing world order, because there's the war going on in Ukraine, in the Middle East. There's a US presidential election coming up. There are also here in London a future UK Labour government coming up who probably will be more EU friendly. And as you described in the European Parliament, there's a shifting political mood we saw with far-right parties performing well, not only in France, obviously, but also in Germany, in Italy, in Austria, in Belgium, in the Netherlands. Actually, it's interesting to point out that there is more populism after these elections to be found in the 5 founding member states of the EU, more than even in Central Europe, if I refer to Donald Tusk's performance in Poland, or the results in Slovakia, or even how the opposition in Hungary did well against Orban, or the results in Romania. But overall, yes, it's a parliament where there are less Greens and more Conservatives. And within the EPP, I think we see the group more leaning to the right. So the Van der Leyen 2, if this happens, will be different from Van der Leyen 1, with priorities on security, economic security, defense, and enlargement as part of that security agenda. But this stability at EU level is thwarted by the snap elections in France. The center holds in Brussels, but not in Paris. Not only because of these European elections, but mostly, above all, because of this surprise move that astounded us, that Macron did with some grit after the much expected victory of the national rally of Le Pen throughout the whole country. I think the difference with the previous results, because it had already succeeded in 2014 or in 2019, but this time, if you look at the map of France, you'll see that RN came first throughout the whole country, except Paris, but really throughout the whole country. Also, not only in its traditional bastions, but also in Brittany or elsewhere. And should the National Rally win the legislative elections, and if we have a far-right government, we will see France entering uncharted political territory, because it will be a cohabitation, as we call it, when you have a head of state and a government that are not from the same political family. But when it comes to the far right, it's, I would say, a cohabitation of the third kind that we have never experienced. And there's also a danger coming from the far left, which is also performing well, which is also not very strong against Russia. I think Macron gambling is to rely on the non-voters. The turnout in these European elections was 51%. So 49% did not vote. And even in our legislative elections we had in 2022, the turnout was even lower. So he really hopes to, in the coming weeks, that all these non-voters, because of the danger that is before us, will come out. But the outcome still remains very open, very uncertain, and the dominant scenario is to end up perhaps with a hung parliament and a country that would be a bit rudderless. We know the National Rally fiercely is against enlargement, any enlargement, which I think is different, for instance, when you look at a party like Peace in Poland supporting Ukraine, or Fratelli d'Italia, or Orban Fidesz supporting the Western Balkans. The National Rally is against all enlargement by principle. It was not much debated during the campaign, not only by the National Rally, but by all parties. And Macron himself was silent in his long Sorbonne II speech. He did not pronounce the word enlargement. The issue could provoke not only political tension, but an institutional row about the role of the head of state and the role of the government in such affairs. We may come back to that if you want in the discussion. But I believe that Macron would want to keep France's stance on enlargement, try to engage this but with no more governmental backing, which may be a real problem.
Thank you. We'll get back to that point exactly later on.
Yeah. Just one very last point. To finish on that. That the National Rally, in its campaign right now, it has watered down many of its economic and social promises, and even its rhetoric against EU is kept very low, but not on enlargement, because it knows that the French public opinion is roughly not in favor of that. So this is not something that he has, at least not to this point, not watered down. Thank you.
Yeah, very important point indeed. Maja Kocijančič, let's move on to you. What is the state of play on the two topics? One is the nomination of Ursula von der Leyen for another term, which was discussed widely at the informal European Council yesterday without getting into a deal, although it was supposed to be an informal summit where only positions would be sounded out. And the second is the strategic agenda, which will be discussed also by the General Affairs Council later today.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. If I start with the leaders' dinner last night, since I was directly asked, it was always meant to be an informal discussion of the leaders, and this is precisely what it was. Of course, the expectations were quite high, but the original intention was for the regular European Council next week, at the end of next week, to do the appointments, and I remain confident that this will be the case. But certainly informal discussions like this, where leaders among themselves can openly discuss the election results, where the EU wants to go in the future, and of course also the so-called EU top jobs, is very important because it prepares the ground. The strategic agenda is also on the agenda of the next week's European Council, and I think it's an important moment where the European Council will set the course for the next institutional cycle with a document that will be annexed to the conclusions like it was in the past, but will give a steer to the institutions for the next 5-year mandate. As you have already pointed out, we expect that enlargement will be included among the priorities in this strategic agenda. Very simply, I mean, because it's in this new geopolitical context, we clearly see the importance of enlargement as a geostrategic investment in peace, security, stability, and prosperity in Europe. Having said that, obviously that doesn't mean that it's going to be a smooth sailing. We already know that from the past experience, but the ambition is very clearly there, and this was not the case in the past mandate. So I think it's, on one hand, shows how this new world in which we live in has changed the perception and brought the enlargement forward to the among political priorities again. But on the other hand, we have already seen this step change in the past mandate with more engagement, especially with the Western Balkans, of course, the European perspective, and given to Ukraine, Moldova, and also Georgia. And the engagement that has happened across the board. On linked to the strategic agenda, I think it's also important to keep in mind that internal reforms will accompany the enlargement process. This is something that leaders have already decided back in Granada last autumn, when they essentially launched the preparations of this strategic agenda with first high levels, so leaders' discussions on the topic. I think that is important because, first of all, shows the seriousness of the engagement. This also means that in the coming mandate, the preparations will need to be done across the board, so from policies to financing to decision-making, but obviously also the underlying fundamentals, including, or in particular, the values on which the EU is built upon, will have to be addressed and taken into account when the EU will prepare itself to welcome new member states. In parallel to that, we will, I think, already see progress with an idea that has been launched a couple of years ago and has been now put in practice, which is the so-called gradual integration. I think that, in particularly for the Western Balkans, is very important because it brings a step change into the process. It creates a level playing field, but it also gives a real dynamic to the process. The growth plan you have seen has been adopted in a record time. And hopefully we will have the reform agendas that will be the Balkans plan on how to implement the growth plan put forward and agreed very soon, because this obviously means that the real implementation can start. This is just one, I think, but very concrete and important expression of this new commitment, which is important also in a sense that it will create visible opportunities of this integration with the European Union for the region.
Let me jump in with a very quick follow-up question. In the strategic agenda, latest draft that you've seen, is gradual integration mentioned and described or specified in any in terms of substance?
Obviously, we have put the proposal of the strategic agenda forward. It still needs to be discussed and agreed with the leaders, but I can at least at this stage say that in the draft there is a reference to the gradual integration.
If I may propose, we come to your last point later, just to get us going and towards Manuel. Sarrazin as our third speaker for his. I would invite your initial remarks, Manuel, with also two questions. One is if you can comment the European Parliament election results in Germany. It was a beating for the Ampel, for the traffic light coalition, and for the government you're representing. And if you can also sort of link it to your working agenda these weeks. So you are also preparing a Berlin Process Summit later this year to be hosted in Berlin, and you're traveling to the region, meeting with the leaders, discussing various other aspects of the enlargement.
Yeah, perhaps shortly. I think regarding enlargement, the Western Balkans, the not so concrete but main reading of the election result seems to be not that harmful, as the big winner seems to be also the CDU-CSU, which is really pro-Western Balkan and pro-Ukraine party. So we have in Germany since a long time this culture that on this questions we have in general a big unity from CDU to Greens, perhaps even some parts of funny, Zoom says I'm talking Arabic because of my German accent in English. Some parts of the leftists. So I think this is not the main point. I think when I'm talking as a Green Party member, should be the most relevant is that there's one simple thing in elections. If you mobilize your potential, you're well off, and then you're able to outreach to others. You are fine. And as we saw in the last federal elections, 21, that we lost a lot of potential of attracting former Merkel voters. So that, for example, the areas where Kretschmann and Baden-Württemberg were taking over CDU voters massively, they all got lost in 21 to Scholz. And now we see that also on our strongholds, we significantly decreased. We lost votes, especially to those not going at the ballots, but also losing to parties like Volt and others, which are then in the end ending up in our parliamentarian coup in the European Parliament. So in former times as an MP, I was advocating for a grand deal with the Grand Coalition on a 3% margin for European elections for the German lists. Our voters like to have more, they're not so monogamic in voting, they have the opportunity to vote for smaller parties. Yeah, so I think in general, there will be more questions for like how the coalition deals with the budget coming up and with the Western Balkans at first hand, of course. What's perhaps relevant is that
you mean the budget, you mean the German budget and the federal government, not the European budget, which will also, we will discuss that later.
Exactly, but this is what's going to come up. There are about 30 billion euros missing. The 2025 that we found last year, you remember the process. And this will end up into the autumn, possibly. I mean, for sure, we will find a deal much earlier because we have a very good working coalition. So I think it's not the point that this coalition or the CDU will change the mood on the Western Balkans too much, perhaps to some extent. To some migrant routes are more important, to some human rights or whatever. Perhaps relevant is that the party in the coalition, which sometimes was the most like difficult from others to be seen regarding Western Balkans enlargement, were the liberals. They would say they're the most, they have the highest approach on merit-based. They stabilized from their own view in that election. So I think they are not so discomfortable in this coalition as they have been perhaps before election day. Discomfort more changed to Social Democrats and Greens. I don't want to say it's a good news, but if you want to search for good news, this might be one.
No, I want to search for substance on the enlargement and in this new political cycle, what will allow us to read it better and analyze it better. So over to maybe your agenda. And also, if you can link it to the common regional market, there is an unsung progress going on with the four mobility agreements in the Western Balkans. It is somehow, it's not enlargement agenda proper, but is moving ahead. If you can maybe in your introductory initial remarks also mention that.
Yeah, I think like the result of the European Parliament elections to a certain extent is for sure relevant, as we, for example, lost Viola von Kramon, who's not an MP anymore, and she was very important for the work there. But in general, I think if it looks like the old coalition will be more or less also the new one, I think there's one more important point than the new personnel is going to be coming up. In the last years, the coordination or the cohesion of the different European institutions was not so successful that everybody in the region had the feeling that I'm having a one-stop shop and I cannot play out the guys and women against each other. So if we will manage to find personnel and an approach between Council and Commission in general, also perhaps within the Commission, might be working on that, then also with the Council, there could be a chance. And I think this is linked very much to personnel. Usually they're not chosen for their abilities, but me as an old European federalist, I still hope for that. A second is that I think what in general we see that the growth plan will increase much the might of if it's for good or for bad, will be in the hand of the Commission. But next to the negotiations, which are Commission-led with an important role of the Council, now we have a de facto second tier of negotiations, which is, I think, in the execution and the administrations in the region, perhaps even the first tier, which is completely in the hand of Commission, and where actually all questions of transparency and democratic discussion in the region and the nation states themselves is not yet linked because it's very fast done and we want to be quick in showing results. And I think this will be important. The Commission will be even more mighty. What we try to do is that we try to link this debate, the Berlin process, the common regional markets, the growth plan and the enlargement. For us, this is one. And we try to like everybody pulls at the string into the same direction. And that the region recognizes, okay, I can only succeed on my way to European Union if I deliver in the Growth Pact. The Growth Pact requires that you can block yourself if you block the region. Okay, and I can try perhaps have a political argument why I deblock the region without having problems at home, because I do it under pressure of Berlin and the partners in Berlin process. So this is perhaps the idea for the next months to gets everybody like playing like a team.
Very good.
Until October, November, December.
I intend to do. Thank you. I intend to do a quick one more round with the speakers and then open up for the Q&A. Please switch on your camera, and I will initially take questions or comments from those who can pose them via video. Let me turn to you, Sebastian. You mentioned that another term von der Leyen as a Commission President will be different than von der Leyen 1, then it will be more focused on defense security. What will be then, what impact on the enlargement agenda do you expect? And specifically, where do you see the internal reforms moving? Maja Kocijančič reminded us that the commitment from Granada was to do this in parallel. This is also very important for Chancellor Scholz and for Berlin, that you first adopt European policies and institutions and then you enlarge. But after such election results and France going, we'll see where, what are the prospects of agreement on internal EU reforms at all?
Well, that's a very quite difficult question. It's true that you mentioned that they're both supposed to go parallel, and France also often insisted that we discuss the internal reform of the EU while going on with enlargement accession discussions. I suppose that first it will be very important to see who gets an enlargement portfolio in the Commission, how the DGNR is or not reshaped or remanaged so that it can cooperate better with the other DGs. But the Commission in the von der Leyen one was very cautious, I thought, on institutional reform. It did not come out with a very strong paper on this. We know that there is very low appetite for any treaty change in many countries, and I think it will be even more difficult in the new French situation to think of any possible treaty change unless we do it through some accession treaties on the side. But it would be easier to think of institutional reform in the same framework that allows by the treaty themselves. You can have many things that are potentially there but have not been yet used. But on the path on the pace of the negotiation accession, I don't believe there will. It's really actually up to how the war in Ukraine evolved as well, because we saw how the momentum given to enlargement was very much linked to the breakout of the war in 2022. Of course, we all hope that peace in Ukraine will come during this next term. But let's also hope that this, in a country like France, this does not then stop the political move towards enlargement, because it was very much linked in the debate on that. And so I think it's also linked to how we deal with Ukraine, of course.
Thanks. Maya, has any member state indicated interest in the enlargement portfolio so far in the informal discussions? And what can be done without internal reforms going forward? The Commission outlined some policy reviews to be done early next year. There will be a budget proposed by the Commission. Any comment on this, if you can share?
I think on your first question, it's maybe a bit too early to say. Of course, there are speculations, but I think a time will come when we will know who the next commissioner will be. I think what is important is that the policy is taken forward with all the necessary seriousness, and we have widened instruments in this sense with the growth and reform facility, in addition to what we already had before. In terms of the internal reforms, I'd like to really underline that this is a parallel process that obviously needs to take place, not just because of enlargement, but also because the European Union as union needs to grow with time and needs to be able to respond to the challenges it faces that are very much multifaceted ones. And all these areas are important in a sense that all together make the EU efficient and capable to face the challenges. And when it comes to the treaty change, I would say that when the discussion started last year, there was a clear convergence that enlargement is possible within the framework of the existing treaty. There are, as Sebastian mentioned, so-called passerelle clauses that have, for example, not been used. And then, of course, part of how the reforms will be done is through the discussions on the next multi-annual financial framework. Because they bring together both policy and its policies and financing. the Commission, the next Commission, will need to put forward the proposal for the next 7-year budget by the summer of next year. And in that sense, we will get first indications of the thinking. But the first step will be the policy reviews that the Commission is expected to come forward in these key areas also in early 2025. But I would here take a step back and just say that while this brings us a set of very complex questions that the EU will have to face with, it's also an indication that enlargement policy as such is taken seriously, and that these preparations essentially are a reflection of the momentum that we have, and that we need to use. And I don't mean just the EU institutions, because for us, of course, this is something we need to do, but also the candidate countries themselves. It's an opportunity that needs to be taken seriously, that needs to be also communicated seriously, and needs to be approached in a way that essentially ends up in a mutually beneficial outcome. As superficial as this sounds, I think that should be the objective.
Or wishful. But the multi-annual financial framework, it's important that we heard again that this will be proposed by the next EU Commission by the summer next year in the usual procedure. This is where the next European Parliament will play a very important role, and the political mood in it on the enlargement. It was always, European Parliament was friend of enlargement. Let's see where we are with the next one. Before we open up the floor, Manuel, quickly with you. I guess you were watching from a side the deal between member states in Coreper on the negotiating framework with Ukraine and Moldova to start the accession talks. What is interesting there for the Balkan countries? And there was also talk about a package deal with incoming Hungarian presidency that gave up their objections after achieving some of their demands. They gave up some of the objections in order to get something for Serbia, which is also tied with reports in the Financial Times that there was a green light given for Rio Tinto to start a lithium mine, very important for auto industry in Europe and electric vehicles, including country that you represent. What is the impact from the negotiating framework on Ukraine and Moldova impact, or what is there for the Balkan countries to watch? There was discussion about simplify procedures and more QMV, qualified majority votes down the road. And second, there is a talk among diplomats that it was a package deal with the incoming Hungarian presidency that involves some progress on accession talks with Serbia during their EU presidency.
Well, I don't see any package deal. There were some rumors like that, but for me, this agreement shows that there's a clear path for Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkans on its own stand. And I think you cannot, if we're going to drink coffee, you should not open up the same again. Yeah? And, also, our very clever friends from the Hungarian presidency know their leverage. Regarding Serbia, I think there's no news in the different positions. Old knowledge that the Commission wants to open the competition. And that's also old knowledge that member states have positions on that. I don't see much movement on that so far. But of course, I can also not predict. Yeah, I think this was your question, right?
Thank you. And as I am getting wind up or stuck on my own questions, let me reach out for help to the audience. Please raise your hand, and I will take I will take the first one from Vladimir Bilčík, another member of European Parliament, outgoing member of European Parliament, that was chairing two committees, I think one on Serbia, one on Montenegro. Please, Vlado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Milan, and very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for the invite, and I think it's an extremely timely discussion and an opportune discussion. Let me raise a few points, maybe as a way of reaction, and also raise a question or two, if I may. Indeed, I am an outgoing member of the European Parliament. I chose not to run, so I've known it for quite some time. Just to echo what Manuel Sarrazin said, sorry to see Viola come gone. We've had long-standing excellent cooperation on the region. And indeed, enlargement has been a much more topical issue in the European Parliament, especially since Russia's brutal and ongoing invasion of Ukraine. But when it comes specifically to the Western Balkans, it's been just a few usual suspects working on the region. And I think this is something that is going to be a big task for the not just the next institutional cycle, but also next European Parliament, to focus on enlargement as a priority, to engage on now the two different regions that we are dealing with. One is, of course, the East neighborhood, specifically really what is moving is Ukraine and Moldova. Georgia is a separate story for the moment. And the Western Balkans to get a critical mass of engagement. Now, I can just tell you from the kitchen of my largest group, the EPP, we've already had some internal discussions since the elections. And I can just say in this forum that enlargement is an issue which is being discussed. It is being voiced not just by the outgoing or long-standing MEPs, but also some new ones, and I think this is good news. I think it is extremely important that we think of enlargement in a different way, and that this thinking is also very much brought to the region. One of the biggest problems we've had, especially in this term, is overall trust in the process. Many in the Western Balkans simply do not believe this is happening and this is going to happen. I think this is the credibility and the trust issue is really the key one. And this is where we need a breakthrough. We need to bring the region back on board in a believable way, that this is not just talk. This is not just about, some money transfers. This is not just about additional documents and reforms, but ultimately small or symbolic deliverables, that this is real. And I think there are several ways how to do this. One is, of course, that once again, enlargement is back on the agenda in a serious way because of what Russia is doing to Europe. And this reminds me of the Big Bang approach, which we had over 20 years ago. And it is extremely important. And I just spent a week across the Western Balkans. One of the messages I'm trying to pass on is that the big game changer has come as a result of Russia's brutal invasion. And the key progress will also be tied to our ability to not only defend Ukraine, but also make an overall progress on Ukraine's European perspective. And this is a message which must be understood across the Western Balkans. They are in the same ball game, and this is part of a larger picture. And I think it'll take some time to sink in, partly because many in the region feel, we've been in a very different exercise, and to a large extent that's true, and they are very much ahead of technically and also in some respects politically in terms of what's happening in Ukraine and Moldova. On the other hand, this is a much larger package which ultimately can help the Western Balkans move. On the positive side here, what I see is that there are things moving on the ground. I was very impressed in Podgorica and Montenegro to what extent, this technical exercise on IBAR, which is happening at the moment. So the green light for the interim benchmark assessment, which will pave the way to potential closure of chapters, which would be really a game changer in the process of the accession negotiations this coming fall, has become the talk of the political talk of the town and of the country in Podgorica and beyond. And I think this is something which all of us need to capitalize on. Enlargement is also moving in the region. There is, despite the difficult makeup of the government in Podgorica, there is a big consensus across not just the government, but also the opposition. Yes, there are big question marks about how this can be sustained with Prime Minister Spajic's difficult coalition. But I'm raising the issue here as a specific example where things have been moving, are moving, and I think they can help us deal with the bigger puzzle. Now, in terms of
do you have any exact question to the speakers?
I have two questions I want to ask. One is precisely on this because the story is much more difficult in other parts of the Western Balkans. We've been overcome by a lot of bilateral issues, which are going to come back to haunt us across the European Union. What can we do to really get beyond this, looking at the region, looking at the situation, for instance, in North Macedonia after elections, looking also at Montenegro and the Jasenovas issue, which could become very sensitive with especially Croatia, looking at the aftermath of the whole discussion on the Bosnia and Herzegovina and Srebrenica resolution. How do we break this? Because that's my question. And secondly, nobody has mentioned so far the upcoming US elections. Now, I understand the French elections is something we are all watching. But one of the reasons why we've been able to move also on some things related to enlargement in the Western Balkans is because we've been able to work closely with our US partners. It's not always been visible, but it's been happening. Now, what could we expect from the US elections and how could we deal with the future of enlargement if there is a change of administration? This was my question to the experts. Thanks again.
Noted. And over to Frauke Zibas, my colleague in crime behind this series.
Thanks very much. Thank you all for your inputs. I have two quick questions. One of them I'm going to Maillard Kocijančič on the gradual integration. Milan already pointed to this a little bit. It is mentioned, and it also, if I have the right draft agenda, it also mentions new and old instruments. So one of the questions would be, what did you have in mind, or what is basically the definition that is behind this gradual integration, as we have different concepts, staged accessions and so on, that was in mind? And when it comes to old and new instruments, do the new instruments refer to the growth facility, growth plan, or is there anything else in the pipeline that you can already share? And then when it comes to another part of the strategic agenda or the priorities for the enlargement and for the Western Balkans specifically, it's of course the stability, good neighborly relations, and so forth. It was already just mentioned, and maybe this question would go to Manuel in this case, looking at the tensions that are ongoing, also looking at the outgoing facilitator or mediator in the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue, and other threats on the horizon, such as a possible Trump administration that some players in the region seem to be counting on. Is there any thoughts in Berlin, in the Foreign Office or also at the government level, on how to kind of bridge the gap until there will be somebody new? Thank you.
Great. Let's start with in the opposite order. Manuel, first with you. Bilateral issues, European elections, or the last question from Frauke.
Well, I think there will be a good solution for bridging. And as Maya said before, at a later point of time, everybody will see what comes. Second, on the bilateral conflicts, well, some years ago under the Austrian presidency in Berlin process, or in Berlin process, they raised this topic, and there were also quite good scientific work on the variety of bilateral conflicts linked, not shouldn't be linked, but linked with enlargement in the region. I think that perhaps in the moment it is not the time for getting a big breakthrough on that in the region. We try, of course, to get some points of QV voting more in the procedure so that the political impact of the its two enlargement process would be less, but still big enough. But in the end, it is necessary that the political will in the candidate states and the member states, if they are also regarded, is there to solve that. I think we can try to be helpful in that. Berlin process can be helpful in that. Activity can be helpful in that. But if you don't have the political will, for example, in North Macedonia, to follow what the Council has pointed out almost exactly 2 years ago, then this is the point where it stands. And I have to a certain extent the hope that regarding, for example, the possible Jasenovac resolution, which might trigger the Croatians, or also the debate on, which will come probably later this week, regarding the usage of North Macedonia or not in swearing-in ceremonies, that the Croats and the Greeks are clever enough to see that this is drafted play against their interest in the region, to push them out, to create a vacuum where others can go in, which is the Turks, for example, in North Macedonia, or the Serbs, for example, in Montenegro. And my feeling is that it's the leaders in both cases are clever enough, not trying to not trap it. And then it's a question how well national audiences are able to cope with technical pointings. But for sure, in both cases, the candidates usually have to deliver, and the member states are the member states. This is what we all learned over a long time, Vladimir, of European history. Sometimes we liked it, sometimes we hated it, but it always was this way.
Very good. I'll come back to you, Manuel, on the US elections, but this is, on this point, the bilateral tension and so on, I would like to invite Maja Kocijančič to comment specifically on the North Macedonia. I think your boss, Charles Michel, is closely observing, watching the situation. There were some contacts with the newly elected leadership. I'm sure he's involved also on tensions, calming down the tensions after the Srebrenica UN declarations and the internal developments in Montenegro with the Jasenovac declaration. That is clear provocation to Croatia. How confident you are that this will be contained from the member state side involved?
So I'd say that bilateral issues, to some extent, while they're not part of the enlargement process, always were in the interplay at various points, not only with the current candidate countries, but also in the past. And in most cases, the EU, while it might have taken some time, was able to resolve them and move forward. Still speaking more broadly, I think that it will be important that in strategic agenda, the importance of the principles pertaining to this, so good neighborly relations, reconciliation, and regional cooperation is underlined, as is the resolution of bilateral disputes. As Manuel said, I think the key here is political will. And if there is political will, these issues can be resolved, even if in the most complex circumstances. I think that the current momentum in a certain way has crystallized this a number of bilateral issues that need to be resolved and brought them really to the surface and under the political spotlight. Which doesn't always make it easier, but it also brings forward various arguments and offers ways forward. On North Macedonia, for example, we've been able to unlock the negotiations. We will now need to see how the new government will approach the issue of the constitutional amendments. The commitment is very clearly there, as is the commitment, or as are the past agreements that will need to be respected. So I think that we will all need to be smart, the region and the member states, to not allow the bilateral issues that are there to somehow overshadow the overall political ambition. And this is the direction we are working in, that the tensions do not rise, but are rather calm, that calm down, that issues are discussed, and that potentially we can help the different interlocutors in the region, and sometimes not just in the region but also member states find a way forward.
There was a question on gradual integration. If you can address that briefly, please.
On the gradual integration, I think at the moment we have existing instruments and the new instrument, which is indeed the growth plan. But of course, I mean, what is important is that various initiatives under the growth plan are actually put into life. We are still at the very early stage of the implementation, and I think that once this starts to happen, we might see new potential of how to take the gradual integration even further. And I think that the opportunity for this comes with the growth plan, but it also is a recurring topic of the EU Western Balkan summits, not just the Berlin Process summits. And I think that that's the sort of a deliberate formulation that we have chosen for the draft, to leave this open. The concept, as I said, was introduced a couple of years ago. It's still being developed, and I think it deserves the opportunity to grow. The Commission did a good job in identifying the first areas, but I would not say that these are the only areas where advances are possible.
Sebastian, we are moving on time. Please comment what was raised, but if you can start with the US elections and the impact on European security and also enlargement.
Well, I will go quickly on this because I suppose Manuel could be even more accurate on that. But I think the key issue about the US presidential election is not only how it deals with Ukraine, because of course this will be, if Trump was to become the president in next January, it will be, of course, a game changer for all of us and how the EU react to it, but and also for the issue of NATO. I suppose the UK here will also be looking very closely at how this election evolves, and with a future Labour government, which is most probably will have next month, welcoming the EPC summit and here in London. They will also be very much focused on Ukraine and how this delivery is and aid is given to the country. For the I would separate the enlargement process to Ukraine and the fact that, as you mentioned, by the end of this month we may have the framework adopted and start the talks, but it will not go very far as long as the war goes on. That is, from a French point of view, enlarging to Ukraine does not make much sense as long as the war goes on. So I don't see. I think there will be a growing gap between the political message given to enlargement and the legal reality to it. The more we move, we already saw it, that there was last December we proclaimed that negotiations would be open, and then now it's still not officially done. So there will be more and more, regardless of the US election in Europe, and even more so with a French cohabitation, a gap between the political message delivered to the countries and the way talks really move on.
Zoran, I see your hand raised. Let me go back before for a quick comment from Manuel on the US elections, in particular when it comes to Serbia-Kosovo dialogue and important supporting role in the background from the US State Department. There is a perception that if there is Trump administration, it would take a different approach to Kosovo. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, I'm not handling US or transatlantic partnership, so it's all above my pay grade. As a historian, let's say, you anyhow don't know what's coming. At perhaps one point in the long history of US, a lot of setups of presidents happened, and the country still was very successful in the end. So regarding this classical debate on land swap 2.0, I of course see such a risk. But instead of talking more about the US regarding this, I prefer to talk about that this was an idea which hasn't been invented in Washington and in Brussels and in other capitals. There was a lot of positive resonance on that. So I think we can easily do something against such concepts by next time, if it's coming up, standing clean as European Union in the institutions and in the member states. I think this would be the important message. I think, if we're honest, it is clearly, like Vladimir said, not only US elections coming up, French elections coming up, German elections knocking at the door. And of course, the region knows that. But this also means that in that time, European institutions will be stronger, right? When member states are absent. What will happen, for example, if you have this kind of coalition between Macron and Le Pen happening after possible parliament election? What will be the outcome for the deal, so to say, for Europe? Will it be blocking or not? I think nobody in Paris yet knows, right, Sebastian? We'll have to see. In general, I would say the times are very risky, the times are very dangerous. The probability that in the next term of European Parliament, Ukraine war will be kind of over is not so low, actually. Nobody knows what's happening. Nobody has a clear time concept. But I think this kind of warfare for 5 more years is difficult for everybody, also for the Russians. So I think it's an important time to start talking about post-war concepts. I remember, when did the French invent the ideas on European Union, actually, or European community? It was in the Resistance under German occupation. When did the Poles invent the idea of German reunification as part of their freedom? It was in Paris, in the Kultura, in the 80s. So we need places where we talk about the concept. Like I think to a certain extent the summit yesterday made it, but I think it must be a clear concept that is linked to our experiences on the continent, where European Union with the community method and the market or is the core. And then for me personally, not as German government representative, it is quite clear that if we believe that Russia or Belarus will be part of this concept of, then we will have a clear problem. I don't see that the future of the market can sustain if we don't have a clarity where the borderline between lie. And for this, I think, France is at the core of those concepts. It's clear that if you have a strong France, you can either go the Brexit way with the new Le Pen, or they kind of adopt a Meloni way. I fear that the Italians are usually more pragmatic on that. For me, it's clear the next years will be decisive regarding concepts of European Union, and the concept is for me not classically questions about institutions only. It's about like who is on board, with whom we build the future or not. And for that, I clearly would say nobody has the idea to, how it's possible to exclude the Western Balkans from such a concept. It's impossible. Sorry, Milan. That was so long.
You painted a broad picture. I would just say that for these new concepts to develop and become policy, you need trust and you need political will, and you neither have a lot of trust and you have a lot of political fragmentation underlined by the European Parliament election results. But Zoran, you have been very patient. Listen, sorry, I have to move on to Zoran now to Skopje. Sorry, we have to.
In the 40s in the Paris, who had
we'll continue, Manuel, we'll continue on this later, maybe bilaterally. But now to Zoran.
Okay. Thank you, Milan, and thank you, Manuel, for giving me the floor. So, yeah, like how it is, you start talking about bilateral issues and all of a sudden you have a Macedonian calling, because for us, at least, it hurts the most in the Balkans. It starts also for the others, to be honest. But yeah, I think that it has spread like a cancer, this kind of bilateral issues and the ways of which member states can extract certain things from candidates. I completely agree with Maya. It's not a novelty. It has happened before, but now you see that that's it becomes the game actually. It's replacing the accession process as such and the entire merit-based process. So what we have seen in the case of North Macedonia, it's for sure the limits of the enlargement process. You can push a certain country to its limits. You can squeeze it. It can make a painful compromise, and then if it's not followed by a progress on the other side, then it's extremely difficult. And that's why I really liked what Maya mentioned, that that there is a responsibility from both sides. It's not only the candidates; it's also actually the member states, especially the ones which are the neighboring member states. And everyone needs to know. Some of them are playing smarter, some of them less, but it's quite complex issue. And about the complexity, I would just want to refer to the voting of the Srebrenica case in the UN, and you will see, how the neighboring countries have actually voted. Definitely, it's a political will that needs to kick in order to move things forward. But with the level of uncertainty around, I think it's becoming more and more difficult. Plus, as any other, political leaders are actually learning from the mistakes from the past, and this is crucial. What we have as a group of think tanks that we are working together, we can already announce a visit to Skopje mid to end of September to assess the situation in the country and see how we can move things forward. And on the bilateral issues, there will be a paper co-published by Klingendahl Institute, DGAP, and ELIAMEP coming. I think it will be out this week, where we are assessing all the elements of introducing QMV, and somehow it follows the non-paper that was initially drafted by Slovenia and Germany. That's one of the strings that we want to follow when it comes to overcoming bilateral issues. And the second option that we are pushing forward is trying to find ways how the Commission can actually move forward without sending so many documents or every single document for approval in the Council. So these are the two paths that we are exploring in order to find ways how we can maneuver the bilateral constraints that exist in the accession process. That's it.
Yes, and I think you can disclose that you are developing this concept and you wrote the paper in consultation with the respective foreign ministries in these countries where you mentioned these three think tanks. You forgot to introduce yourself, I think, at the beginning.
Sorry. Zoran Nechev, Associate Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations, and also from the Institute for Democracy in Skopje.
Thank you. And if there are no other questions or comments, then I would very much welcome any comment from the Western Balkan countries on the European Parliament election results. How is it perceived, or on what was discussed so far? Otherwise, I would move to our speakers and even propose that if there are no further comments or questions, we would close early.
Just to mention, there is one question by Julia von Dobenek in the chat. I don't know if you saw it.
Thank you. Then I will read it. So as Vladimir Vilčík already mentioned, not too many members of European Parliament focus on the Western Balkans. Not too many MEPs focus on the Western Balkans in general. Viola von Kramon positioned herself clearly when it came to criticism towards Serbia. How do you see the new composition of the European Parliament? Will there be a balanced, pluralistic approach, including critical voices towards the Western Balkan countries within the next European Parliament? Over to you, Vlado. If you can also share your thoughts on the EPP political group. So who are the strong people on the enlargement, except David McAllister, who is staying, and who else to watch?
If you put me on the spot like this, I think it's a bit too early to say. Let's see how people sort of set up in the different committees, and there are a number of people who are continuing, who will be present, who are going to be vocal on enlargement. My point was more general. I expect a number of people to be engaged, but it's always good to get more voices from beyond the immediate neighborhood of the region, north of the Alps, beyond the Danube area. I mean, this is extremely helpful and has always been helpful when it comes to pursuit of enlargement in the past. And I hope we see more of such voices also in this next legislature. A number of people are out. I'm finishing as the standing rapporteur for Serbia as well. So it'll be interesting to watch who picks up this file and this dossier. If it stays within my group or a different political group picks it up, I think that will also be extremely important in terms of, how things are handled inside the European Parliament. Viola von Kramon is out. Other people, Paolo Rangel, who was the standing rapporteur for Bosnia and Herzegovina, are out. Is also out. I suspect that we will have a number of new people, but this is something which is going to be a matter for the next few weeks, and perhaps we can have a discussion once the situation is about clear on this. But I just want to make a general point. Enlargement is very much on the agenda of the European Parliament, on the agenda of my group. And I think, and I want to underline this bilateral issues, and that's the reason why I raised it, I think they are part of a wider problem which we face, and that's the hybrid warfare. It's no doubt that Russia especially is very keen to exploit this every time they're tabled, and I think we need to see through this game and be a lot more united inside the European Union. Enlargement has to be an EU issue, not an issue of single people or single countries inside the European Union, and then we can persevere it as a realistic goal.
Thank you. For the final round, or there is one more raised hand, so maybe not final round, back to the speakers. Sebastian Maillard first.
One just general comment on the European Parliament regarding enlargement. Perhaps the insistence on the rule of law may be not as strong as in the previous European parliaments. That's just something that I'm hinting at, and of course it's very early we're still a very early stage, but I get the feeling that if there are less Greens, less centrists, much more stronger ECR group and ID MEPs, we may see a European Parliament, and also in the Council itself, and beyond enlargement. I'm not sure the toolbox for the rule of law would be that has been very much used during the previous legislature. I would be interested to see how this develops, but maybe especially with the geopolitical imperative to move on enlargement, we may not be as a bit more lenient on that issue. That's just a thought I wanted to share.
Maya, if I may address you also a specific question based on what was discussed. You have worked for the Commission, then for the High Rep. Now you are with the Council, with the European Council President. As we move to the new political cycle with new appointments there, can you walk us through what will be important decisions, except the appointment of the new Commission President, the vote in the European Parliament on the new Commission President, and then the appointment of the Commissioner? To what extent is the next, the successor to Charles Michel, your boss, involved on these issues, and particularly on rule of law and the underlying values? There is a procedure on the report on rule of law, which accession countries are now part of it. It was postponed to September. But how really, on a daily basis, is the cabinet of the European Council President involved in following it? How important is, who will it be in terms of enlargement and some political experience, but also political will behind that?
So, I mean, we are in a period of the institutional transition. So once the top jobs appointments are done, there will be obviously next steps that will have to be taken. In a sense, the Parliament is already in this procedure on the side of the Commission. We will need to see the college composed. I think that in this sense, given the political priority given to enlargement, I think there will be an interest among a number of member states for the file, because obviously it will be an important policy, but it will go across the board in terms of the reforms that will have to be done. The European Council and its president obviously play a very clear institutional role. I would highlight a few points. First of all, when it comes to the European Council, under this mandate, enlargement came back on the agenda. And if you would analyze the conclusions of the European Councils of the last decade, for example, you would see that this has not been the case. So I think that already reflects this new reality. I think that the President of the European Council also in the role that it has on the foreign policy not only follows but engages with the leaders of the region, and this has been the case in the past. And very importantly, the EU Western Balkan summits have become annual events. And this is one of the points that I actually wanted to make at the very beginning, that this high level of engagement needs to continue. It's important in many ways. It's not just that the leaders of the region and of the EU have opportunity to talk regularly. It also is part of building trust. It's also part of understanding each other better. And I think that is not negligible in this complex world we live in. And it also allows the leaders to move forward from a discussion that is about principles, and it's about basically an overall commitment that into a much more concrete topics. And I think that it's important, that this high-level engagement continues also in the future, because it will be an important driver of the progress forward across many policy areas. And with the fact that we have been able to establish this at quite a regular pace, I think is important. And the Western Balkans are also part of the European political community, which is another way of staying engaged across the continent. So I think that in a nutshell, the President of the European Council, but the European Council per se, on a level of a political steer, remains or should remain the driver of the process, together with other institutions. And I think there is a clear role here for it, but it needs to work together with the European Commission, together with the High Representative Vice President in his or her unique role. And that we need to ensure that there is a clear complementarity of all this. I think Manuel referred to this at one point, that we all need to work in the same direction with same messages and very clear ambitions, but also basically with the conviction and based on principles. And here I would conclude just to say that I think the rule of law and democratic principles will remain the fundamentals of the projects. I mean, it's what the EU has been based upon from its creation. And we had these three, or let's say, looking back, three key moments in history when the EU was created, with the big reunification of the continent, and we are now at a similar crossroad. And I hope that we will collectively be able to take the right path and build a European Union that will be stronger and be capable to face the challenges, including the challenges that are posed to us by our own citizens in elections.
Very good. Over to you, Manuel. Maya ended up also on big themes that would be more appropriate maybe in terms of format for an evening drink rather than this working online breakfast. But your closing remarks, and I will still try to provoke you on one, or ask you for insights on one issue, which is the incoming Hungarian EU presidency and the enlargement. What are your expectations?
First, I think if you talk about leaders, in the history of European Union, trust is not very important. But trust as a general concept is completely overestimated. The European Union is a genius model where trust is not necessary. You can tell me that the Bundesbank trusted the French currency politics in the 80s, for example, but still Germany went common currency. So leaders sometimes have to pursue it, but Europe works so well that you meet each other so often again that you cannot stop making deals, because then next day the next deal will be without you. And this is to a certain extent, I think, also what we try to do with the Western Balkans, that we put them into something that is them six to European Union, that, you know, we are working on daily basis with each other, that, you know, you don't need to trust each other, but you need to make deals anyhow, even if you don't trust each other. If we don't go forward with the region until there's trust, I mean, we asked President Serbia to find a deal in the dialogue. We don't say first you trust each other, then we expect you to deliver in the Ohrid agreement. So I think trust between leaders is important, but we wait for trust in the Western Balkans, we will wait even longer than North Macedonia waited for opening negotiations. The Hungarian presidency will be clearly for Western Balkans. And this is fine. On some areas, Germany has a different approach than Hungary. In the general outlook that Western Balkans belongs to the region, we are on one page. And we closely coordinate Berlin process also with the presidency. And as Maya said, the summits, the Western Balkan summit, are an important part in the calendar, and they are a highlight of the political year in the Western Balkans. And I think when we think about deliverables, we should think about the whole calendar and let this be done. And in general, I think that it's never important which format or which person or which institution is delivering what, but that we use from the region in difficult times and before.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Manuel Sarrazin in Hamburg, I believe. Maja Kocijančič in Brussels, and Sebastian Maillard in London, where is he also associated with the Chatham House, where our speakers today. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Perhaps one last remark, Milan. Can I just do one, if you have time for it?
I cannot refuse that. Yes, of course.
No, because just a reflection on trust that Manuel was talking about. I believe it's very important inside the EU. I mean, it moves on. If you didn't have trust between Kohl and Mitterrand, or between Delors and Thatcher, I mean, things would have gone in anywhere. But we need more understanding, and I think it's the purpose of the European political community when Macron speaks of intimate strategy. That's what his the expression he coined was, to try to bring in more understanding between the leaders, and the fact that this EPC meeting will happen next month, and also during the Hungarian presidency in November, and then also in Denmark, and there will be still twice a rhythm twice a year for as long as the war goes on. So I think that's important to build some more mutual understanding between the leaders, and also a meeting between Western Balkan leaders and their EU counterparts. But my worry is that there is today deep mistrust in France, and if we have a cohabitation between the National Rally and Macron, of course it will be built on defiance and a very polarized country. It's not done. I mean, it's a very open, very open election. I of course mentioned many times, referred to the possibility of a RN government, but it's not at all done. I mean, really keep in mind that this is completely open. I don't think the polls are very significant at this stage, but it is the trust in France and in the country as key at the European Council, I think will be questioned after that, and that's I think what we will be looking at by the 7th of July. And even after the 7th of July, if we have a hung parliament, we will not exactly see what is where we're going. We will, I think, in the UK after the 4th of July, they may perhaps turn the page of uncertainty that Brexit had opened. We may open a page of uncertainty in France once the UK has closed itself.
Thank you, Sebastian. We are closing early. For those who are based in Berlin, I see some names that come regularly to our Balkan Breakfast series. The preliminary date for the next one is 10th of September. We will be able to look back on a traumatic summer. Have a very good day. And thanks again for my colleagues at the DGAP for your support. And hello, have a good day.